Again, thank you for joining today's Social Selling University webinar. Today we have two great speakers. We have a renowned writer from a book called The New Handshake that was well before its time. We have Barbara Giamanco and her business partner, Kent Gregoire. They've partnered together to join forces and have a company called Social Centered Selling. Barbara and Kent, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about social centered selling.
Well, we're very excited about this, Coca, because as you know, this really supports the work I've been doing for the last several years. And Kent and I actually have been teaming up for, the past year and a half. And so we just felt that there was an opportunity to rename the company and unify our brand. And really what we were about is we were all about helping sales organizations adapt to today's buyer. And so we offer up social media strategy, consulting, and implementation work, as well as we offer up a really solid sales training methodology called Sell Excel, selling at the executive level, as well as offering a product called SOS, which is a Sales Opportunity Snapshot, which we're going to be talking about some of these things during the session. So we feel like now we've really kind of married the two, and the new name really reflects and gives people a strong sense of what the business is all about. And it's very exciting. We became official as a government entity just early last week.
Outstanding. So tell us about what you're going to cover today.
Will do. So we're going to talk about how to identify and get after those high-profile prospects. And what I want to level set everybody on is, you said new content. We definitely have new content because we are not about repeating. At the same time, there are a few things that they're going to see in the front end of the presentation, Coca, that reinforce everything that we talk about in every program that we do. But really our goal here is to zero in on how do you get to the right prospect, and what do you say when you finally have the opportunity to engage with them, whether it's online, on the telephone, or in person. So that's what we're going to share with people today. And like always, we like to give people practical tips that they can actually put into practical application right now to start seeing some results.
Outstanding. All right, well, let's get started. I'm eager to see what you're presenting today.
Okay, well, thanks again for having us. We're looking forward to it. So I'll just let everyone know briefly about me, then I'll ask Kent to introduce himself and we'll jump in. So as Coca said, I am Barb Giamanco, and thank you very much. I'd like to think I'm world-renowned. I am really proud of the book, The New Handshake, Sales Meets Social Media. What everyone should know about me is I have 30 years of background selling and 30 years background in technology. Prior to starting my own company 10 years ago, I worked for a few organizations you might recognize, like Microsoft. So I have a lot of experience in how to apply technology to the sales process. And I guess I'm kind of an old-timer in the social media world. I've been using the tools and working with them the past 7.5, almost 8 years. And so very excited to have the opportunity to really be part of this movement called social selling. So Kent, let everyone know about you.
Great. So again, I'm Kent Gregoire, and what you should know about me is for more than 20 years I've helped organizations supercharge sales efforts by incorporating training and employee performance programs. They're all based on tested and proven research methodologies. Having been the founder and CEO of many companies, I know how important it is and have had experience in bringing solutions to the market, building brand equity, and successfully leveraging business partnerships through sales channels, and we've experienced some pretty exceptional growth. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the things that I learned along the way, but most importantly, based on the proven methodologies that we have to be able to share with you. Thanks, Barbara.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Kent. We're going to have a great time as always. And for those of you who are tweeting, I'm at Barbara Giamanco, and as you can see on the screen, Kent is at Kent Gregoire. And if you are so inclined, please use the hashtag #SocialSellExcel. Share with folks what you're learning from today's session. Would really appreciate that, and we will certainly reciprocate and return the favor. So what we want to talk about today is this notion that great sales skills married with social media, it includes what we call social business. Now, there are other companies who have definitions about social business, both internal and external, and we're really thinking about this and how it aligns with the sales process. This is the way business is being done today. It is, again, that marriage of great sales skills and social media. So what we hope to share with you in the next quick 60 minutes, we want to talk about how sales has been disrupted and what that new buyer looks like and what they are expecting and looking for. And I'm going to share a story about that because I just experienced something about an hour ago which really illustrates how certain salespeople need to learn how to change their approach. We also want to help you identify and reach prospects using the tools that are right for you, and we're gonna talk about some that you know and plug some of our favorites for sure. But then we also want to talk about what are those initial sales drivers that make that executive phone call successful. You know, you might only have the one shot, whether it's in person, on the phone, via email, whatever it may be, but you've got to really understand what's going to drive the success of that interaction. And then finally, we want to talk about those differences in organizational perspective. So let's start with this idea that the conversation has largely begun without you. And what we mean by that is, you know, people who are looking to purchase products and services, the executive, the buyer you're looking to get in front of, they are engaging in social media and in, in groups and in forums where they're asking their peers what to buy and from whom. And so we want to really drive this point home, and we talk about it in every program because it's so important for people to get their head around. So I'll tell you this story, and it just, I just have to laugh. We think about this new buyer, and this new buyer actually is looking for you to add immediate value. They are in charge of the buying process. They're doing their own homework. They're leveraging the web and peer recommendations. And so the salesperson who is not adapting their style to understand this really is putting themselves in a position where they are going to get locked out of opportunities, is what we really believe. So I'll share this story. It's kind of funny, but it's not really funny, and it literally just happened an hour ago. So I receive an email, a message, and it's addressed to Christopher. First problem, I'm Barbara, and the email address they've sent it to doesn't really exist, but okay, so I take a look at this email. The second problem is they have spammed me, the salesperson has spammed me, and he's selling an opt-in database service. You know, I'm looking at this email and I'm thinking to myself, really? You can't get my name right. You don't even have the right email address. You're selling an opt-in database service, and the only way I can opt out is to actually reply to your message. Clearly, there's a bit of a disconnect and a problem here. So many times I kind of let that stuff slide. This time I actually sent a nice note back and just said, just for the record, I'm not Christopher, no such person exists. Secondarily, you are spamming me selling an opt-in database service. There's a disconnect, and there's probably a better sales approach for you to consider. And so this is what's happening. You know, it's not that there's anything necessarily wrong with sending an email, but for goodness sakes, do a little homework, right? Know who you're talking to. Go to the website. Go to LinkedIn. Utilize InsideView. But personalize this message and be sure that whatever you're doing is really making a good first brand impression. All right, because I still can't get over that. You spam me over email to sell me an opt-in database service. Okay, maybe the irony only rests with me, but I think that's a little crazy.
Talk about not knowing your customer.
I know, seriously, right? And I'm a person who's all about social-centered selling, really being approachable, really being authentic, but also providing value to people and approaching people in a way that really suits them and is about them and for them versus what's in it for me. So that's just a classic example of a disconnect with a salesperson who probably thinks that's a great approach, right? And so this buying cycle and sales cycle aren't often matching up, and that's what we really want people to, to really understand, that it is more about, it is not marketing to the masses. It is marketing and selling to individuals and customizing your approach. And same goes for telephone calls. Coca, you probably get them too. I know Kent does. Nothing drives me more insane to get a phone call and you can tell they're reading off a script.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Or what they have to sell is so not even close to what I need. A 5-minute cursory review of the website might have told them that, but my favorites are when they call me to sell me a competing product or service. So what are you going to do? So, in this world, really, it's about starting with that strong network, and we're huge fans of LinkedIn, obviously. And so you want to build this network, but it's more than just collecting connections, if you will. It's really leveraging the data in a very important, professional, and intelligent way to get access to the people that you're trying to reach. And if you really do get your head around this notion that buyers are seeking out information about what you have to offer before they may pick up the phone or connect with you, then you just need to really understand and accept that compelling presence is a must. You know, clean up that LinkedIn profile, tighten it up a little bit, add a presentation, have a book list. For goodness sake, invest in a video clip. It's, you know, they're not that expensive, and it's compelling. It's the kind of thing that makes people want to know more about you. I know this for my own business. Every client in the last 6 to 8 months has commented on the video and has said that it's played a part in their decision. So don't assume that people are going to read all that text on your LinkedIn page. Give them something that really compels them to want to know more, so they get to know a little bit more about you. And then in the spirit of expanding that network, we have been working with a really cool product, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But as you're connecting and linking with people on LinkedIn, we all get these email messages back that say, hey, Barb, you're now connected with Tom. Well, do you stop and take a moment and actually dig in a little bit deeper to their connections and determine how there might be a good fit? So in order to get the opportunity to get in front of the high quality prospect that you're looking for, in order to be able to identify them based on your own criteria, you've got to have a decent network to actually work from. And I think that a lot of times people just collect those connections and then don't do a whole lot more with it. And look at the companies that they're following. Who are some of the companies that your connections know that you might be targeting and trying to get into? As Kent's going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation, we believe that there are two really important ways to get inside an organization or be exposed to an opportunity, and we'll talk about that. So as you're expanding your network and connecting with people, who are they connected to and what companies are they following or are connected with? These can be some ways for you to kind of beef up that opportunity for yourself. Now, we've been working with a tool that is really pretty cool, and if you're a Salesforce.com user, Intro Rocket is really great because it helps you take the process of getting those intelligent introductions and going a little bit further. And what it essentially does for you is it allows you to actually pool your connections. So Kent and I are connected through our Salesforce account, and Intro Rocket is pooling our aggregate LinkedIn connections to give us the opportunity to determine who's got more pull in terms of getting in front of either the executive or the executive that we want to have a conversation with. So it's really a pretty cool tool, which I encourage people to look into and learn a little bit more, or reach out to us, because it really helps you gain powerful leverage. Again, if I'm trying to get into Microsoft, then I can see who in my network has the strongest amount of connections into that company, which is going to lead to more we believe, more targeted opportunities, and you're going to get the right kind of introductions into the organization. And then when you're thinking about getting in front of the right buyer for you, the right executive for you, I'm often surprised, honestly, at how many people don't have a target list of the companies they're trying to get into. And you can use LinkedIn and the advanced search feature to really mine data to help you get in front of the right decision maker more quickly. And so, you can use targeted company pages, you can use search. All of these things really give you the ability to narrow down and determine how you're connected and who can help make that introduction or refer you into the organization. And I talk about this a lot in each of our LinkedIn sessions, but using advanced search to create search lists, lead generation lists based on the criteria of the executive buyer who's right for you, that's gold. And so many people, I find, don't use this feature where you can create a list based on title or keywords and save that. And not only do you have a robust list that you can start working with now, as in I want to reach out to Steve Toma at NCR Corporation as an example, I can then start to determine how we're connected and plan my strategy for making that initial connection or engagement with him. So when you save these lists, week to week, LinkedIn goes to work doing the work for you, continually bringing that ideal buyer right into your inbox, because every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern you get an email from LinkedIn letting you know about some of the new players who have joined your network. So it's really powerful. So when you're thinking about targeting the right executive, here again is a place that I've seen based on my own experience. I ask people, gosh, who's the ideal buyer for you? And often I get well, everybody can buy my product and service. And the truth is, when you're selling and marketing to everybody, I personally believe you're selling and marketing to nobody. You've really got to narrow that down and determine who this person is, what's their market space, what's the ideal client profile, what do they do, what's important to them. And as we're going to talk further, we use tools to help us, and I'll give a shout out for InsideView. Love their tool. It's awesome. It can help you answer these kinds of questions. You can follow the executive when you want to stay on top of any information or conversation happening about them. So really, really important, we believe, to target. And again, very surprised how many people don't do that. I touched on this briefly. This is really about creating that lead generation list where you set up keywords or titles and then save that list so that you are alerted each week automatically, letting the technology do the work for you. But this becomes a great opportunity to start planning a strategy for how you will reach out to these people real time. And so as we kind of continue that discussion with targeting the right executive and what are some of the things you need to be thinking about, I'm going to go ahead and turn the show over to Kent.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. We're going to be talking again about targeting the right executive. I oftentimes tell salespeople, don't be intimidated by an executive's rank and file. Executives are definitely less concerned about our rank, and they are most concerned about the value that we can deliver to them. So it's important we keep that in mind. As we go through the next few minutes, I want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of the different perspectives of influencers, and to understand the concept of relevant executive. That's a very important concept, and we'll continue to talk about that during today, and discuss the concepts of formal and informal influence and power in an organization. But there certainly was one person who really understood the concept of the relevant executive, and that was Lou Gerstner. Certainly it was a number of years ago, but this really illustrates the power. What he found is that in IBM, salespeople were focused on one silo, the CIO silo. They had not gone outside the silo to get to the functional areas of the business, places they needed to get to develop those strong relationships. So the first thing I'd like to do is let's take a moment and review an important concept, and that is of the relevant executive. Who is this relevant executive? Is it the economic buyer? Is it the decision maker? Is it the person in the client organization who has access to funds? Well, we define the relevant executive as the executive who stands to gain the most or lose the most by the outcome of the project or application associated with a sales opportunity. Think about this for a moment. Think about the deals that you've won, and really think about the deals that you lost. Were you aligned with the relevant executive for the sales opportunity you were pursuing? And if you were not, that may be a good reason why the deal was lost. So let's take a look now at the organizational chart. JKEA International is a case study that we use frequently, and so just pulled some charts out of there. And by taking a look at this chart, who has the formal power for an IT-based customer service solution? Well, certainly the informal power, it might be Dave Powers, certainly Anne-Marie Lawson as the COO would have formal power. And, who has the informal power, I should say? Can you tell from the organizational chart? No, you cannot tell who has power or influence. It turns out that the people with the informal power are the CEO and CFO. We've got to get this information from behind the scenes. Who gets assigned to key projects? Who initiates the project? again, who stands to gain the most or lose the most? And then we go on and we want to take a little bit more in-depth look at the informal power and the concept that I shared about the relevant executive, that executive who stands to gain the most or lose the most as a result of the outcome of the project or application. So in this case, it actually turns out to be Benjamin Wu, even though it's an IT solution around a customer service requirement. So one of the things that we always want to be focusing on is who is that relevant executive, and we need to be aligning ourselves with that relevant executive. As it turns out, if we're not aligned with them and somebody else is, they're most likely going to win the deal. So really think about that as you are working your opportunities, and maybe take a look at those opportunities you're working now and determine, have you identified that relevant executive? So I'd like to move on and talk about different perspectives. This is really important. You know, there are times we have meetings with salespeople at different levels in the organization, and we really need to be talking their language and understanding what their needs are. So at the operations level, their focus is on price and make certain they get the steepest discounts. They do want to hear about technical details of the solution, and they'll compare those and drive for a lower price solution oftentimes. Management, however, is going to look at you know, how successfully do they feel that the solution or the products or services will work in their environment. Their questions will usually be broader in nature than those posed at the operations level. And when you get up to the executive level, you know, here the questions will be quite different. Most of the questions from executives will be focused on value and return on investment. They'll want to contrast value they can receive from your solution versus the value they can receive from other similar investments. So they're, in effect, examining other uses of funds. This may mean that non-traditional competitors may surface. The executive might want to examine the ROI that could be achieved by each of these two very different uses of funds. There's an exception to this, and this is something to really be looking for. If your solution addresses the client's breakthrough initiative, there might be more at stake than a return on investment. Hint, that's why if you can identify a breakthrough initiative and the relevant executive, you have a very clear advantage and most likely will win the opportunity.
So Kent, just a quick question for you, because you know, through the years we've been taught just get in wherever we can. And so what in your mind is the problem with that kind of sales strategy?
Well, you know, getting in wherever you can, it does sometimes create some barriers in moving upward. And it takes generally about the same amount of effort to get in at the highest level or with the executive that most likely that you're going to have the most meaningful conversation with. So we really believe in getting up higher. And also another reason for being higher is, remember, at the executive level, they understand the big picture that the management and operations level might not know about. They're going to know what initiatives are in play and be able to guide you in that particular situation. Lots of other things come to mind, but you know, certainly whether you should pursue an opportunity or not, there are some compelling questions to answer that, but generally the answers to those questions around pursuing an opportunity truly can only be obtained by having conversations at the executive level, like funding. You know, what are the real drivers for change, and learning more about those initiatives that are at play.
Yeah, and is there Coca's probably got a thought too. I'm like, is there a danger that if you go in lower in the organization, you kind of get stuck there and you just really have no opportunity to go any further?
Well, there could be that opportunity. I mean, or that situation could occur. It's more around, you know, alienating that individual when you go around them. And you may need them to be on your side later on because they may be an influencer. And if they find out when you've been talking with this executive, senior level executive, that you've done that, you know, they may not be in your camp, and that's a challenge. So you do need to be careful, but you also need to measure the risk. If you go in at a lower level and you realize that there's no opportunity to win the business at a lower level, what do you have to lose, right?
Exactly.
What do you think, Coca?
No, yeah, I mean, it sounds really familiar to what sales executives and sales managers are dealing with on a regular basis when it comes to just their prospects and going after new customers, where they understand that, you know, there are some customers that it's not even worth chasing because of one reason or another. You know, sure, they could use your product, but are probably too small or aren't the perfect fit. So, you know, these alignments go along with, you know, typical business practices that I've been hearing for years. It's just, you know, you got to get a little even more finite and finding the right people to be talking to.
Absolutely. So Kent, how do we find out about that breakthrough initiative? What are some of the things that we can do?
Well, you know, you really have to be listening to the drivers. So I say, you know, it's a lot around the research. You know, there's a ton of research you can do. InsideView certainly is following, you know, if you enter the companies in the executives, you know, you may be seeing things by using InsideView as well as simply doing Google searches, looking at the annual report, having conversations with senior level executives. Those are the only individuals that actually know of the breakthrough initiatives. So, you know, it's a combination of research and developing the credibility, which we'll be talking about as you gain access to senior level executives, how you can obtain that information. But it's going to come from multiple sources. And it takes a little bit of effort, but boy, if you can identify a breakthrough initiative and then the individual who has the most to gain or lose, that relevant executive, let me tell you, you probably are going to have a home run. The probability of winning that opportunity, assuming you have a solution that can be implemented well into the client environment, the value that you're going to deliver is significant. By those two things alone, it's going to be pretty powerful. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the breakthrough initiative later.
Excellent. So it begins with research, right? So how do we conduct really good research so that we know that we are getting in front of the right people and that we are finding the information and the things of value that are going to be important to them?
Yeah, because it is the executives who are able to contribute the greatest insight, and we're able to create long-term collaborative relationships. So we should be looking at research at multiple levels. The first one is really understand your prospect's industry or client, you know, the industry that your client executives that you're selling to are engaged in. They expect you to actually have a base level of knowledge. And it's even better if you can articulate key metrics around their industry and understand the competitive positioning that they see themselves in the industry. That would be one thing. So the prospect's industry, your prospect's company, as you become more knowledgeable about your client's strategy, as well as their key business drivers and initiatives, your ability to suggest new ideas and solutions pretty much dramatically going to increase. And at this level of learning, you'll be able to provide business value. You know, I look at it this way. When you're actually going and doing research, you really need to be looking for drivers. What are the reasons that they need to make a change, and is there some time element to it? Those are the things that are happening in the client organization that actually brings the initiatives about. And so we have to get really clear about those drivers. If there's not a driver, a really strong driver, even if they claim there's an initiative at play, it's going to be hard to win it because it will ultimately break down as they become more familiar with what's happening in their environment. Your prospects' customers, you know, make sure you really know them. Know their top 10 customers and what percentage of revenue is generated from these customers. If you have a solution that could help them retain those customers, that's a pretty powerful place to be. Know your prospects' competitors. Know their top 3 competitors, in fact, and determine whether you might have a solution there that might help them in the marketplace be more competitive to an advantage. And then lastly, but of great importance, is really get to understand and do some real homework on the client executives themselves. Try to find out, you know, what is their informal influence in the organization. And remember, when dealing at this level, at the executive level, you're in a strong position to deliver extraordinary value to the executive and to the company. And that's what we want to be doing. It's really important that we establish that quickly because that's part of establishing credibility. So let's take a look at some examples of where you might do this research. So one of the areas certainly is going to be around your prospect's industry. You might use business.com, your prospect's company, and the prospect's executive. InsideView, LinkedIn, use other sources. Sometimes there are things within particular industries. There's great sources. We have a significant guide that we refer to often when we're doing research on organizations. And the internet is just one of the most powerful places to be. But also think of doing research with others in the organization. Sometimes you can call into other areas and do a little bit of research, find out what's going on, speak with executive assistants. So I believe very strongly, and we believe very strongly, that doing research definitely creates an advantage for you. And by doing your research and demonstrating that to an executive, you have increased your credibility significantly. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a few moments.
Ken, one of the things that we have found here is that in fact, we've won deals this way where we have a target company and we start watching news about them. It was just a couple weeks ago, interesting story where we found out that one of our customers was approved for some $50 million round of funding before it had actually hit the wire because somebody had just mentioned it online, that there was a rumor of this. And we reached out to our customer and they basically shot back and said nothing's been publicized about this yet. But this is one of those things that if you have a prospect that you're constantly tracking and trying to get insights into, being able to leverage all the social intelligence out there that's happening can really make that impact when you're trying to get a hold of an executive, because it shows that you are doing your homework and in this case providing a solution that could help them with their customers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Coca, we're not just sucking up. We just love InsideView. I mean, it's executives expect that we as sales professionals have done our homework. And those of us on the line, and many of you out there who are listening, have been in sales long enough to remember something I like to fondly joke about, which is the library, where we had to go and dig through books and all that sort of thing. And I mean, today's executive expects that you've done homework, that you know something about their business, that you really are able to add value. You can help them solve problems in ways they can't. This is not about the demo dolly routine and the show up and throw up routine where you're just throwing out those features and benefits. It's really demonstrating that you're paying attention to. And as in Coca's example, okay, well, sure, they said, well, it's not really public yet, but let me tell you, and I'm betting this was true, huh, Coca? They're thinking, how do you know that? How'd they know that?
No, exactly.
And,
that's exactly what they were thinking.
Right?
In fact, with other customers.
And that impresses people.
Yeah, we saw that a company that we were prospecting, one of our sales team was prospecting, the company had won some national award through some organization, and because we were connected with all these streams of information, and we had already had some initial conversations with this VP that we were dealing with, we just shot off an email, hey, congratulations on winning this award, and this executive came back with, how did you know we won this? We haven't even talked about this internally yet, but it had already hit the wire. But being that tied in with real-time information does make a difference, because it cements your your persona within that company, that hey, these people are actually paying attention, they know something that we don't, so let's give them the time to tell us what they have to offer.
That's exactly it, right? So what a perfect illustration, and I really do love the ability to create those watch lists and get that real-time information, because one of my current clients was getting hammered in the press about something, and I knew about it, and I was just saying, I've seen this, what support can I offer? Is there anything that I can do? How are you handling it? That definitely shows that you care about their business, about them, and that you are paying attention. And that is the kind of trusted advisor relationship that companies and executives are looking for. So when we think about the research tools, I'm using InsideView. I'm using things like company pages inside LinkedIn. Oh yes, I'm using Google and the web. There's just so much information available to you that only really takes a few minutes of time. You target who you're trying to reach. You know what you're looking for and why. And then you're able to start a more interesting conversation that is focused on the executive that you are trying to get in front of. And that's a whole different conversation. I mean, if I think about myself, if somebody comes to me and says, Barb, I noticed you just formed this new entity. How's it going with the new business? You know, I would be very interested in talking with somebody who's demonstrated to me that they cared enough to do a little bit of upfront homework, and so that's really important. But now, and I should say, now as we move forward, so we keep talking about calling on executives and why we believe that's so important, and it isn't that you can't start lower in an organization, but as Kent said, there can be some risks. So we want to talk with you about the Sell Excel methodology and why we believe it's so important to create, maintain, and leverage those relationships at that executive level.
Great. So Sell Excel is all about creating, maintaining, and leveraging those relationships. And what we are specifically talking about are objectives today, how to gain access. Now, there are a number of them, but let's take a look specifically at the objectives that we're going to cover in the next few minutes. And you should have a better idea and be able to develop perhaps a new approach or a slightly modified approach to how to make that initial call on the relevant executive, or certainly an executive. Develop a plan to contact that executive and describe the potential roadblocks that may inhibit your access to the relevant executive and how to circumvent them. We're going to touch on that briefly today. So the four approaches, first of all, would be the overt approach. That's where we just pick up the phone and we make a call. Sometimes we've sent an email in advance or we've done something else. One of the dangers in doing that, of course, is there could be immediate rejection. But let's face it, sometimes the best way is simply to pick up the phone. Another might be a sponsor. This is from someone inside the organization. It's really important that if we do this, that it's a credible source. And I'm going to explain some of these a little bit more, but I'd like to just give you an outline for now. The referral, that might be someone outside the organization, a consultant, somebody that's working with the organization in some capacity might be able to make the introduction to an executive or the relevant executive for an opportunity. And lastly is the gatekeeper. Well, I've learned a lot about working with gatekeepers over the years, and actually, in some ways, I'm very passionate about this because I've seen it work very well. And one of the keys in working with a gatekeeper is to try to actually go to a gatekeeper at the top of the organization. Go right to the CEO's office. It's a great place to do homework, and always treat that gatekeeper as if they are also a senior level executive. Certainly they have great influence. What you might be interested to know is that in surveys that have been conducted over the years, and these are very significant surveys and studies, with senior level executives of very large companies, 84% of the time an executive will take a meeting when someone from inside their organization, a sponsor, makes the introduction. Again, it's got to be credible. So going back to what you asked earlier, Barbara, if you go in at a lower level in an organization, because that just seems to be the entry point, one of the things you want to be working on is for them to get you to the person that you want to be talking to. Sometimes that's easier said than done, but 84% of the time, executives will take a meeting from someone within their organization. And 44% of the time, they'll accept a meeting from a referral source, someone from outside of the organization who has great knowledge of their company and of the executive, not the next door neighbor. That's not quite the same. But I'd encourage you to look at different ways to get to executives, try different approaches, find out what works best for you. Approaching the relevant executive, I'm going to go into this in a little more detail, but just think of it this way. If you're not getting really passionate about contacting that relevant executive, it's probably not going to come across. Make sure that you're doing your homework. We've talked about homework. Do your homework, and you need to be able to demonstrate that you've done your homework. Prepare your approach by developing and scripting it in advance. We'll look at that. Now, we're not talking about the kind of script that you're just going to plain read off. We're talking about a script that helps guide the conversation so that you are being able to give clear introduction, your purpose, demonstrate the homework you've done, ask for commitment and action. And, make sure that you're always listening and developing an understanding of their vision. It's most important that the executive feels understood. And so let's take a look at preparing your approach. I call it the four-prong approach. Pretty straightforward. I bet most of, if not all of you, have seen an approach very similar. First thing is introduction. My experience is that many and most successful sales professionals really do script out what they're going to say. After all, you've done all this work up front. You don't want to blow it with a phone call. It's your turn to demonstrate that you clearly have done your work up front. So the introduction, you want to be brief. Remember, they only have a few moments to talk with you. Explain your connection. Who referred you in? What gave you the right to be able to call this person? Purpose. Be clear and specific as to the purpose of your call. You might be asking for a meeting. Explain the homework. I know I've said this many times, but one of the things our research studies and the surveys have indicated, one of the fastest ways to creating credibility is to demonstrate that you've done your homework at the three levels: industry, company, and the executive. And to actually be able to talk with that executive and say, I've through some research, I understand that you have these three initiatives. Which one is most important to you and why? You definitely don't want to be asking that person what initiatives they have. You need to be doing your homework up front. And then commitment and action. That's a real missed opportunity. Remember, these executives are really busy, and they want you to tell them what they need to do for you. You might be asking them for that meeting, or you might be asking them for an introduction to somebody else in the organization, or a combination of both. And remember, don't be surprised in your conversation if they refer you to someone lower in the organization. And if that happens, always do one of two things, potentially both of them. Ask the executive to make that introduction. Don't just go do it on your own and make a phone call or an email into that person. Ask the executive to make the introduction for you. And then always leave the meeting with a way for return access. Find a way to reconnect with the executive who sent you down. Perhaps you're going to go do some research and do some fact-finding. Ask the executive if you can review that with them. Will they agree to a meeting in the future? That's very powerful. So it's important to prepare your approach up front. Script it out. Don't read it. Let it flow. You're only going to have 3 minutes, 5 minutes max. But executives said that they would take a 3-minute phone call from professional salespeople when introduced by someone inside the organization. So you have a pretty tight time frame there. Using email or voicemail to access executives. There's a lot of debate on this issue, and I'm not going to even profess to believe that I think one over the other or either are right for you. But if you do use email, one of the things that we're very clear about is in the subject line, make sure that you put only the referral's name in the subject line. So in this example on the screen, it would be John Cochran Referral. If you're going to leave a voicemail, and sometimes there are some reasons perhaps you want to do that. Maybe you follow the guidance of others that say it's a great way to condition the person to receive your call. Well, if that's what you believe, make sure that you've scripted that voicemail out in advance, knowing that you might get it, and maybe even play the voicemail into your own voicemail and listen to how it comes across. Are you sounding like someone that you would actually want to call back? Or when you do call in, or when that person calls in, would you want to take their call? So those are some great things that you can be doing to gain access. Barbara, maybe talk a little bit about LinkedIn and how that.
I will definitely do that. And before I do that, I was just going to ask both you and Coco a question, because I know this. I see this sometimes in LinkedIn groups where there's this sort of this ongoing conversation. Do you leave a voicemail or don't leave a voicemail? Coco, what do you think? How do you think it's successful if somebody just keeps calling but they don't leave a voicemail with this intention they're trying to get a live person? What's your thought on that?
Well, I think that if the salesperson is constantly leaving voicemails that aren't getting returned, there's something else that's going wrong.
Yeah.
I do believe that leaving voicemails is important. It's one of those things that does kind of get, I don't know if it's the annoying factor, but it does get you in front of that person because they do have to move through the voicemail. I think it's important to know how to leave that voicemail in a short and compelling way that makes them at least remember who you are. But I've always adopted a multi-pronged approach when it comes to communication. So maybe it's a voicemail followed up by an email, then something, some other type of social connection. Maybe if I have his Twitter profile, I'll tweet something to him, or I'll send him a message on like LinkedIn or some other network. Leaving the voicemail alone doesn't really work unless you're getting that introduction. You talk to any sales manager on up to the executive level. I mean, how many of them are actually taking these phone calls? And as Kent had said earlier, it's very few, unless there's a referral being kind of passed along. So I think that it's important that you do leave them occasionally. You shouldn't be the only person leaving them voicemail 7 times a day, but there are other ways to get in front of these people. So I think that you need to look, as a salesperson, you need to look at all of the tools available to you and leverage them correctly.
Coco, I think that's a great, situation or a great piece of advice, using multiple approaches. One of the things that I think can be a danger is if you keep trying to call a person and they're not answering, don't assume that they're not looking at caller ID. They might be busy. So I think that, we have to be careful how many times we're simply calling a person in a short period of time. And I have heard that as a problem. It's never been in the research studies that have been conducted around SellExcel and Sales Opportunity Snapshot, but informally, we did find that executives will oftentimes not answer the phone if they keep seeing the same number calling in over and over.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's just professional to leave a message and also make it compelling, as you said, and ask yourself, would you want to respond to that message? For me, I've got some basic biases. Be articulate. Make sure I can understand your name and the phone number and all that sort of thing. But really, I think if you're following some of the suggestions that Kent has already provided along with Coca, if you leave in that message something that is about them, you just saw that they won this award or whatever it might be, that in my mind is going to be much more interesting. Or if it's a referral by a credible source and that sort of thing, much more interesting, and they'd be more inclined to want to call. So, what about LinkedIn, right? I mean, people ask me all the time, what about making those connections over LinkedIn? And I certainly don't think that there is a problem with that. I will tell you that I happen to be a fan of the 4 approaches that Kent talked about. The 2 that I am most a fan of are really being sponsored in by somebody who is credible in the organization, and actually that strong referral who is also somebody who's credible. So on the sponsor side, I can just share a recent story with you where we have a new client as of the 1st of February. This is a very large technology company. In general, could have taken months to have the opportunity not only to just meet, but to move an opportunity through the sales pipeline to close. And in this case, it happened in 60 days. And it happened because the person who sponsored us into the organization, she'd seen me speak, had already started speaking to her management, and she was viewed as very credible. Then the executives wanted to talk to us. And so that's a great example of how you can shrink that sales cycle when you are connecting with somebody who can sponsor you in. And then on the referral side, I'm a little old-fashioned. So inside LinkedIn, you can ask for introductions. I choose not to use that. I don't want to send something to Coca and say, hey, Coca, through email, Coca, can you send this on and get me connected to Kent? A couple things happen. I think you lose some of the personalization and the professionalism of it. Second, I don't know how well Coca really knows Kent unless I pick up the phone and call, so I don't want to assume that just because they're connected they have an awesome relationship. And third, you kind of lose control of that. You don't know. I don't know if Coca sent it or how long it's going to take before he does send it. So personally, when I have identified an executive using LinkedIn that I want to connect with, in this example, maybe it's Valerie, well then I immediately look for all the people that we have in common. Who do I have shared connections with? And I'm going to determine of those few people who I'm going to call. I do believe in that phone technology. I'm going to call to sort of discuss a strategy, and oh, by the way, I'm going to then offer to do something with that for them in return. And finally, let me just say that if you want to use InMail, I'm not a fan personally because I think it's kind of like, well, it's, You don't know them yet, so technically it's spam. But if you are going to use InMail to engage, then use it as a tool to engage. Provide value just like you would if you were leaving that voice message. Don't use this as an opportunity to just start hawking your product or service. So those are some of the things that we think are important in terms of getting that access using the different vehicles. And I happen to agree with Coca. It's not one thing. It's a combination of different approaches and tools that will lead to your overall success. So Kent, how do we address the roadblocks that are absolutely going to come up?
Well, there's certainly a lot of different ways to address them, and I bet I have a lot to learn. I bet there's some I have never even heard of before that are successful. However, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, why does the roadblock exist? When we can really get to the bottom of that, then we might be able to more effectively, and hopefully more effectively, we can come up with a plan to move around that roadblock. You might want to use client executives with the company that you already have relationships with. This sounds pretty obvious, but it is one of the most effective ways to move around the roadblock. Getting to the relevant executive is critical, and if you have little chance of getting to that executive, you're going to have little chance to none of winning the opportunity. So as you begin to evaluate what are the risks of how you decide to navigate the roadblocks, sometimes the risk isn't so great if you know you're not going to win the opportunity unless you get to that right person. Look for a significant event. I just saw something in InsideView. Actually, I saw 2 items that were significant events for clients of ours, and I notified the client of these events. I've also been suggesting they use InsideView, which since then they have both signed up to do so. But significant events are a great way to get through to an executive, and oftentimes is a way to navigate around those a roadblock. It may be equivalent rank. Let's say you're trying to get to the CFO in a company. Maybe it's having your CFO to their CFO have that conversation with you present. That can be highly effective, and I've seen that used many times. Certainly leveraging the use of business partners. Always understand the credibility there between your business partner representative and the executive and the company. But those are certainly some of the things that you can be doing to address the roadblock. But always ask yourself, what are the causes of the roadblock? And then, try to come up with some techniques that, have the lowest amount of risk with a high payoff. And I bet you're going to come up with some ways of being able to do that that are even unique to the situation. So, hints for calling on client executives. This is a recap of the part that I've gone through. Barbara's going to continue with a little bit more, which will have some a great summary. But I want to give you some hints. Remember, client knowledge at all 3 levels of learning, which are the industry, the company, as well as the executive or executives with whom you are meeting, will facilitate your return access at higher levels in the client organization. Continual and effective execution at the executive level instills that loyalty. And remember that rapport with executives is only one component of long-term relationship. What I mean by that is the integrity. You need to consistently deliver both integrity and capability. Demonstrate that. And over the long term, they'll give you what I would consider and put you into the value zone. And work really hard. Identify that relevant executive, that one executive in an organization who ultimately has the greatest influence, very informal, to actually make that buy decision. I oftentimes will look for that executive where there is both a personal win, and I can give you some ideas around that, a personal win as well as a business win. So when I ask an executive, I understand your 3 initiatives in your company to be the following, which one is most important to you and why? That's really getting me much closer, giving me very powerful insight to understand, are they potentially the relevant individual and why? Why is it so important to them that this initiative becomes successful? So I hope that's been helpful to you, Barbara. I know you've got some final points you want to make to help bring this together.
Sure. We'll just wrap up with a summary, and then I'm sure Coca might have a couple of comments. I mean, really, when it gets down to it, we probably haven't shared things with you that are like tremendously radical or things you haven't heard before, and isn't that just the way with great approaches? It's really about putting these things into practical application. I guess what we want to leave you with is that the buyer's changed, and even though you might want to go kicking and screaming, and even though certain approaches might have really worked well for you in the past, buyers are looking for things that are different, and the executives that you're targeting clearly have spoken about what's important to them and what they're looking for in terms of the relationship with those of us who are, we're sales professionals. Be clear about who you're targeting and find ways to participate in the forums or the online networks where they may be. But also, while you're cultivating that network, make sure you're adding the value and the visibility, but you're doing your homework. Use the right tools. When you're planning for the sales meeting, again, we're just sucking up. We love InsideView. It's a great tool. They don't ask us to say that. I've been using it for quite some time now and love it. So use tools to do the research. Use Google. Use LinkedIn. Gain access to this information that can help you stand apart from your sales competition. I mean, it's just really important, because if you don't stand apart, you just look like everybody else, and you're just going to be part of the rank and file. And then look for ways to get those introductions in through sponsors or referrals. And again, make sure they're credible and that their introduction really holds weight, because we have seen firsthand, and I'm sure Coca has examples, as do others, that you can shrink that sales cycle down and you can get in front of opportunities much more quickly when that happens. Not that the other approaches won't work. I found for myself personally they can just take longer, and so like many salespeople, I tend to be a little impatient. I get excited about these opportunities. I want to get in there quickly. So, Coca, we want to thank you for inviting us back. I really hope that people gained maybe a couple little tips or thought about things in a new light with respect to how to really identify and get in front of the right kind of buyers.
Yeah, and thank both of you. I learned a few things. This is a great series of content. I mean, it just built off of the first webinar, and I believe we have a third one scheduled for next month. That we'll start promoting soon. But again, thank you, Kent and Barbara, for putting together this webinar with us and the Social Selling University to kind of cover how to get in front of these executives and how to align ourselves correctly.
Well, we really appreciate the opportunity. We are salespeople, and listen, one thing that I'm loving and encouraged by, sales seem to be picking up in lots of ways for people, and again, we know from experience, and from experience, when you follow some certain practices really intentionally and make a commitment to changing your approach and maybe in investing a little more time than normal to really do the upfront homework, boy, does it pay dividends. So we appreciate the opportunity to have some time in front of the group. And as always, everybody can connect with us, right? We're happy to connect with you on LinkedIn or converse over Twitter. And if you have questions